Snow whispered against the high ridges, hissing as it slid from the pines, wrapping the mountains in a shifting white veil. The air bit hard, sharp enough to sting the inside of the lungs, and the Bitterroot Range stood silent except for the creak of leather straps and the steady crunch of boots over frozen ground. Elias Crow moved through it as if he belonged to the cold, broad-shouldered, fur-lined coat pulled close, his rifle slung across his back. 11 years without a woman's voice in his ears, 11 years without the nearness of anyone who might soften the edges of his solitude. The mountains had become his walls, his confessional, his graveyard of old wants. He was tracking elk that morning, eyes narrowed against the glare off the snow, when the sound reached him. Faint at first, a shuddering cry, and the panicked scrape of hooves. He stilled. It came again, torn thin by the wind. Elias turned toward the canyon's lip, stepping over deadfall until the trees thinned. Below, half buried in drift and shadow, a wagon lay at an awkward tilt, one wheel shattered, its load scattered down the embankment. A mule jerked against its harness, snorting clouds into the frigid air. Beside it, a woman knelt, struggling to free a trunk caught under the wheel. Her coat was ripped at the sleeve, skirt hem dark with ice, hair whipped loose by the gusts. He descended slowly, boots cutting into the frozen slope. She heard him before she saw him, straightening in one sharp motion, a gloved hand going to the small knife at her belt. "Road to Dry Creek's gone," he said, his voice low, steady. Snow buried it 2 days past. Her eyes, gray as the storm clouds pressing over the peaks, narrowed. "Then I'll walk. It's 20 miles. Wind'll take you before sunrise." Her jaw tightened, but her chin lifted as though the thought of dying in snow was still better than accepting help from a stranger. Elias took a step closer, slow enough not to spook her. "You've a choice. Freeze out here or walk with me." She glanced toward the long white stretch of canyon, then back to him. The wind pulled another shiver through her frame. He extended a hand. It hung there between them, a space measured in heartbeats and stubbornness. At last, her fingers brushed his, cold even through the wool, and he closed his palm gently around hers. They worked together to unhitch the mule, salvaging what they could from a wagon. Blankets, a tin of biscuits, the trunk she guarded with the kind of fierce protectiveness that made him not ask what was inside. Dusk pressed in fast, turning the sky a deep indigo. He led her toward a cedar stand he knew, where a hollow trunk would keep the wind off their backs. The fire was small, just enough to push the edge of cold away. Sparks drifted up into the night, like lost souls seeking a home. She sat with her back against the cedar, arms around her knees, face tilted toward the heat. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Margaret Hale." Her voice held a careful weight, the kind that came from deciding exactly how much of yourself to give away. He nodded once. "Elias Crow." Silence thickened between them, broken only by the crackle of wood and the soft, restless stamping of the mule outside. After a while, she spoke again, her eyes fixed on the flames. "I left Dry Creek because people like to believe what keeps them warm at night. And sometimes that's the worst about them." He didn't press her. Some wounds were better left unopened until a person wanted to show them. "I came here for the same reason," he said. "Different people. Different lies." Her gaze slid toward him, searching, maybe measuring the truth in his words. But she didn't ask for more, and he didn't offer it. In the quiet, there was something almost easier than talk, a sense that each understood the other's exile without needing proof. Snow began to fall, soft and fine, ticking against the cedar bark. The air between them carried the scent of wood smoke and something unspoken. She shifted slightly, drawing her blanket tighter, and the edge of her boot brushed his. He felt the jolt of it, small, accidental, but it lingered. Before dawn, the fire had burned down to embers. The cold bit hard again as they rose and packed what little they had. Elias led, breaking a path through drifts that reached their knees in places. Margaret followed close, mule in tow, her breath ragged in the brittle air. Around midday, the wind shifted, driving snow into their faces. She stumbled once, and his hand shot back, catching her wrist before she fell. Her grip tightened, just for a moment, before she let go and straightened on her own. "Almost there," he said. She didn't answer, but her eyes found the thin trail of smoke curling above the trees ahead. The town lay beyond it, quiet from here, almost harmless in the distance. They paused on the ridge before descending. From here, the outlines of roofs and streets were etched against the pale sky. Elias watched her expression shift, something hard settling back into her features. The armor people, where when they know, they'll be seen again. You could turn back, he said. Find a place deeper in. The mountains, they don't ask questions. Margaret's gaze stayed fixed on the town. They don't answer them either. The wind pulled at her hair, lifting strands against her cheek. She didn't move them away. Elias followed her line of sight, the both of them standing there like figures carved in frost. The mule stamped its hooves impatiently. Somewhere below, a dog barked faintly, the sound carrying up the slope. Neither of them moved yet. The snow kept falling, drawing a white curtain between the ridge and the town below, as if daring them to step through. The descent into Dry Creek was quiet except for the crunch of their boots on the hard-packed snow. Elias kept a pace just ahead of her, close enough that if the slope turned slick, he could reach back. The mule trailed behind, steam rising from its nostrils in the sharp air. As the first buildings came into view, Margaret's shoulders drew straighter, her steps more deliberate, though her eyes avoided the windows they passed. Dry Creek was small, but held long memory. On the general store porch, 3 men stood shoulder to shoulder, their breath visible, eyes following her. Their murmurs carried in the stillness, low but not low enough to be mistaken for anything but recognition. A woman in a flour-dusted apron glanced up from the bakery window, then pulled her daughter inside with a quick, tight motion. Elias felt her pace quicken beside him. He shifted slightly, so his arm brushed hers, a silent tether. She didn't look at him, but her breathing steadied. At the livery, the owner, a thin man with a crooked hat and a voice like gravel, stepped out. "That mule yours, Hale?" Margaret's voice was even. "It is. You owe for last winter's feed. I don't stable debts." His eyes slid to Elias briefly, then back to her. "Payment's due before she gets a stall." She reached into her coat pocket and drew out a small silver brooch, its surface dulled from handling. "This should cover it." He squinted at it, unimpressed. "Not near enough." Elias stepped forward. "Put on my account." Margaret turned sharply toward him. "No!" The word was swift, almost sharp enough to cut. "I've had enough of men paying my way." "It's not payment," Elias said. "It's keeping you from standing in the snow all night." Her jaw worked as if she meant to argue further, but the wind cut through the stable yard, rattling the door. She handed the brooch to the owner, who took it with a smirk and waved them off. They moved on, heading toward the saloon, the only place promising heat without questions. Inside, lamplight pooled over scarred tables, catching on glass and brass. The low hum of conversation dipped when they stepped in. Elias felt it, the shift in the air, the way some silences were made of weight rather than peace. At the far end of the bar, a tall man turned on his stool. He had a lean face, sun-creased skin, and eyes that narrowed with recognition. A slow smirk bent his mouth. "Well, if it ain't Margaret Hale," he said, voice carrying easily over the quiet. "Didn't think you'd crawl back here." Margaret kept walking, eyes fixed on an empty table. Elias matched her pace, but the man, Cal Boyd, rose and stepped into their path. "Town's been wondering what hole you fell into. Guess the truth's never far behind, huh?" The saloon stilled. A single glass was set down too hard somewhere in the back. Elias's voice was low but firm. "Step aside." Cal looked him over, amusement flickering. "And who might you be?" "The new one she's working on." Elias didn't answer. He just stood there, steady as stone, until Cal's smile faltered. Then Cal shoved him, not hard, but with enough force to test. Elias caught his wrist before the man could pull away, twisting just enough to make bone and tendon protest. Cal's eyes widened at the sudden strength in the grip. The room was silent, but for the creak of the bar beneath Cal's other hand. Elias leaned in, voice meant only for him. "You've had your say. That's enough." He released him abruptly, the way you might let go of something dead. Cal stepped back, rubbing his wrist, eyes darting toward the others in the room to see if anyone had seen him falter. Elias turned away from him, without another word, and reached for Margaret's hand. She didn't resist as he led her out into the brittle cold. Under the dark sky, her breath formed small clouds between them. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice unsteady. "I told you," Elias said quietly. "I haven't seen a woman in 11 years. I'm not letting go now." They walked toward the edge of town, the glow of lamplight fading behind them. Snowflakes spun in the lamplight before drifting down into shadow. She didn't pull her hand from his, though her fingers were stiff with cold. past the last building, the road opened to fields rimmed with frost. The only sound was the mule's slow plod and the wind sighing across the open land. Somewhere ahead, the river's low murmur carried in the stillness. Margaret glanced sideways at him. In the dim light, his face was unreadable, but his grip stayed steady, as if the contact itself was a promise. She didn't know yet where they were going, whether back into the mountains or to some corner of the valley where no one cared about her name, but for the first time since seeing Dry Creek on the horizon, she felt her breath ease. Behind them, the town lay small and watchful, its whispers too far now to catch them. The snow kept falling, each flake erasing a little more of the trail they'd made coming in, as though the mountains themselves meant to claim them both before morning.